I still remember the sound of that door closing behind her, a sound that split my life in two. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even angry. It was quiet, deliberate, and final. You know how some sounds never leave you? That one stayed. It echoed in my chest for years, long after the house fell silent, long after the laughter stopped. She walked away with everything. The house, the car, the savings, and worst of all, the part of me that still believed in love. But here's the part nobody ever tells you. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to see what really matters. And trust me, what came next, not even she could have predicted. Stick with me because the man she left behind wasn't the same man she'd meet 20 years later. Back then, I was just another man in his 40s, trying to hold a crumbling marriage together. I worked long hours, always telling myself I was doing it for us. But in reality, I was doing it to escape the silence between us. We stopped talking, stopped laughing. Love had turned into polite nods and forced smiles at the dinner table. I didn't see it then, but she had already left me in her heart long before she left me in the house. When the divorce papers came, I didn't even fight. Maybe I should have. Maybe that's where I went wrong. But when a woman decides she's done, no lawyer in the world can argue her back. She cried a little in court, talked about how we'd grown apart, how she needed to find herself, and somehow, in the middle of all that, I ended up signing away the life I'd spent 2 decades building. She took everything. The savings we'd made for retirement, the house we'd bought together, even the dog. Yeah, she took the dog too. People think heartbreak makes you cry. Sometimes it just makes you numb. I remember sitting on a half-broken couch in a small rented room that first night, staring at the wall and thinking, so this is it. This is how it ends. No anger, no rage, just emptiness. My friends told me to move on. My son, grown and busy with his own life, called once every few weeks to check in. I told him I was fine, but inside I was crumbling. The years that followed were hard. I worked 2 jobs, one fixing old machines, another as a night watchman. I lived cheap, ate simple, and saved every coin I could. People around me saw an old man with bad luck. What they didn't see was the fire still burning quietly inside me. Every time I felt like giving up, I'd hear that door close again, that soft, final sound, and it would push me to keep going. I didn't want revenge back then. I just wanted peace. But life has a funny way of circling back. 10 years went by, then 15. I'd built a small workshop by then, repairing electronics and old radios. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. The same hands that once shook with despair were now steady again, busy, useful. I didn't have much, but I had purpose. And for a while, that was enough. Then, one evening, just as I was closing shop, a fancy black car pulled up outside. I thought it was a customer. The window rolled down, and there she was. My ex-wife, older of course, but still carrying herself like she owned the world. Her hair was perfectly styled, her clothes expensive, but her eyes told a different story. For a second, she looked at me like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. "You're still here?" she asked, half smiling. That's when something inside me shifted. I smiled back and said, "Mom, still here." Still standing. She wanted help, believe it or not. Her new husband had passed away, leaving her with debts she couldn't manage. The same woman who once walked out of my life with everything was now asking me for a favor. Life really does come full circle. I told her to come inside, pretending like nothing had happened. I made her tea, in the same chipped cup I'd used for years. She talked about her struggles, how everyone had left her, how she was trying to rebuild. I listened quietly. I didn't tell her how I'd spent nights wondering how she could do what she did. I didn't tell her how much pain I'd swallowed to get to where I was. I just let her talk. That night, when she left, I sat alone again, but this time there was no ache in my chest. There was clarity. For the first time in decades, I felt in control. And that's when I made a promise to myself. I wouldn't just survive. I'd rise, not to show her, but to show myself that I still could. From that moment on, I changed everything. I upgraded the workshop, hired 2 young apprentices, and started taking on bigger projects. Old clients brought new ones. My reputation grew. Within a few years, I had a full company under my name, one that fixed and refurbished old equipment for big firms. It wasn't flashy, but it was solid. You know what's funny? The harder I worked, the more the world seemed to open up. People started respecting me again. The same man who once lost everything was now being called Sir. But the best part was yet to come. One morning, my assistant walked in and said we had a new potential investor interested in our expansion project. She handed me the file. I opened it and nearly laughed out loud. The name on the paper was hers, my ex-wife. She had no idea it was me behind the company. Life, it seemed, was setting the stage for something bigger than revenge. It was giving me a chance to rewrite my ending. I didn't call her right away. I waited. I wanted her to walk through those doors, to look me in the eyes and realize that the man she'd once thought was broken had built something she could never imagine. That day came soon enough. She arrived, escorted by her new business advisor, unaware of who she was meeting. When she stepped into my office, she froze. For a few seconds, she didn't even breathe. I just smiled and said, "It's been a long time." Her lips trembled. I didn't know this was your company, I figured, I said calmly. You've always been good at taking what isn't yours. But don't worry. This time, there's nothing left for you to take. She sat down, flustered, trying to regain her composure. She wanted to talk business, but her voice kept cracking. And me? I was calm. Too calm, because in that moment I realized something. I didn't hate her anymore. I didn't even want revenge. I'd already won. She just didn't know it yet. That was the moment I leaned back and said, "You once took everything I had. Now, without even realizing it, you're trying to work for me." Her face turned pale. She glanced around the room, at the staff, the awards, the photos, all symbols of the life I'd rebuilt. And then she looked back at me, unable to speak. I stood up, walked to the window, and said softly, "Funny thing about life. It always gives back, but only to those patient enough to wait." The look in her eyes that day, it wasn't anger, it was regret. Pure, heavy regret. And as she left that office, I knew the circle had closed, but the story doesn't end there. Not yet. Because what happened after that meeting changed everything. Again, that night I didn't sleep. I kept replaying the meeting in my head, not because of anger, but because of how strangely calm I felt. 20 years ago, if someone had told me I'd face her again and feel nothing but quiet satisfaction, I would have laughed. But that's the thing about time. It softens the edges of pain until all that's left is wisdom. The next morning, my assistant told me she had sent an email asking to schedule another meeting. I didn't answer right away. I wanted to see what she'd do next. By noon, she showed up at my office again, this time without an appointment. She walked in slowly, almost cautiously, like someone stepping into a memory they're afraid might hurt. "I owe you an apology," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I was young, selfish. I didn't see what I had. I didn't say a word." She kept talking about how life hadn't been kind after the divorce, how she had married again for stability, not love, and how it all crumbled anyway. I listened, not out of pity, but out of closure. Then she asked something that caught me off guard. "Can we start over? Maybe work together? As partners?" I looked at her for a long moment. The woman sitting in front of me was not the same one who left me decades ago. She looked tired, worn out, like someone who'd been running from her own choices for too long. But still, I couldn't forget what she'd done. "I don't think we're looking for the same thing," I said quietly. "You're chasing peace. I already found mine." She nodded slowly, tears in her eyes, and for the first time I saw her as human again, flawed, broken, just like me once. When she left my office that day, I knew I'd close that chapter for good, but fate, as always, had more in store. A few weeks later, my company landed a massive government contract, the kind that could change everything. We needed extra staff, and through a hiring agency, resumes started pouring in. One name caught my eye, her son, the same boy I had once helped raise. My stepson. He didn't know who owned the company, but his resume landed on my desk like a ghost from another life. Part of me hesitated. Part of me wanted to reject it out of pride. But something in me whispered, "This is your chance to do something different." So I called him in for an interview. He walked in tall, confident, wearing a crisp suit. But behind his polished smile, I could see the same hunger I once had, the hunger to prove himself. He didn't recognize me at first. 20 years is a long time, and I had changed too. My hair had gone silver, my shoulders broader from years of work, and my eyes carried the quiet calm of someone who'd seen it all. "Tell me," I said, leaning back, "why do you want this job?" He spoke about his goals, about building a future, about second chances. Every word he said sounded like a mirror reflecting my younger self. When he finished, I smiled and said, "You're hired?" He looked surprised, then relieved. "Thank you, sir. I won't let you down." For the next few months, he worked under me without knowing who I was. And I watched him, his work ethic, his sincerity, his effort. He was good, too good to be dragged down by the mistakes of his parents. And slowly, a sense of quiet pride grew inside me. Maybe this was how fate repays you, not through vengeance, but through the chance to rewrite old wrongs. One evening, as we stayed late finishing reports, he asked me a strange question. "Sir, have we met before? You feel familiar somehow." I chuckled softly. "Maybe in another lifetime." He smiled and went back to work. He had no idea how close to the truth he was. Months passed, and his mother, my ex-wife, found out where he worked. She showed up one day panicking, trying to pull him out. "You don't understand," she told him. "This man—" I stopped her with a calm wave of my hand. "It's all right. Let him decide for himself." Her son looked between us, confused. "What's going on? How do you two know each other?" She looked down, shame flooding her face. He's your former stepfather." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush the air in the room. He turned toward me, eyes wide, searching for some clue that this was a joke. When he saw the truth in my face, his mouth fell open. "You knew?" I nodded. "From the start." He took a deep breath, then looked at his mother, then back at me. "And you still gave me this job?" "Yes," I said simply. "Because you deserve it." For a moment, no one moved. Then, to my surprise, he stepped forward and shook my hand. "Thank you," he whispered. His mother broke down crying. I didn't say a word. I just let her leave. Some lessons life teaches through silence. That night, the man, stayed behind. He said, "I heard stories about you growing up, that you left her with nothing, that you ruined her life. But now, I think I understand," I smiled faintly. "Every story has two sides. You just have to live long enough to hear both." After that night, something changed between us. He started treating me not just as his boss, but as a mentor. We worked together on new projects, and soon the company grew beyond anything I had imagined. His ideas were fresh, his drive unstoppable. It was like watching a new version of myself rise from the ashes of my past. Then, one day, he said something that almost brought tears to my eyes. "You know, sir, I always wanted to have a father like you." I looked away quickly, pretending to read a file. "You do," I said quietly. "You just didn't know it until now." It was then I realized revenge might feel satisfying for a moment, but redemption changes everything. Still, there was one last thing I needed to do, something that had been waiting 20 years to be finished. You ever wonder what happens when life finally gives you the stage to finish a story that's been haunting you for decades? That's where I found myself, standing at the edge of a chapter that refused to close unless I wrote the ending myself. It was a cold evening in November. The city lights outside my office looked like memories, bright, distant, unreachable. I was sitting there going through the quarterly reports when I saw her name again. My ex-wife. She had filed for bankruptcy. Everything she'd built after leaving me had fallen apart. For a long time, I just stared at the screen. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel sad. I just felt still, like the world had come full circle. That night, I called her son, our son in a way, into my office. He was now the director of one of our divisions. Sharp, capable, steady. I told him to sit down. "There's something you should know," I said. "Your mother's company went under. She's going to need help." He looked at me, confused. "Help after everything she did to you?" I smiled faintly. "Maybe that's exactly why she needs it." He didn't understand at first, but I could see the conflict in his eyes. The same conflict I once carried, between anger and compassion, between justice and peace. "Sometimes," I said quietly, "forgiveness isn't about them. It's about setting yourself free." The next morning, I had my legal team arrange a buyout. We acquired her remaining assets, but instead of dissolving them, I rebranded them under a new name and offered her an advisory role. When she came to sign the papers, she looked at me like she couldn't breathe. "Why?" she whispered. "After everything?" I shrugged gently. "Because I can," that broke her. Not in cruelty, in realization. She started crying, and I just sat there letting her. I wasn't trying to humiliate her. I was giving her what life rarely gives anyone: closure. When she finally looked up, her face was softer than I remembered. "You've changed," she said. "No," I answered. "I just stopped fighting ghosts." From that day on, I watched something remarkable happen. She started rebuilding her life, slowly, quietly, without pride. She worked hard, stayed humble, and for the first time in 20 years, she looked at peace. Meanwhile, her son kept rising through the company ranks. He had my drive, her resilience. Together, we built something bigger than any of us could have done alone. And sometimes I'd catch him glancing at me like he still couldn't believe we'd come this far. Then came the night of the annual gala. The ballroom shimmered with golden lights and music. Everyone was there: investors, employees, even a few old faces from my past. My ex-wife stood at the far end of the room, watching me with quiet pride. When I took the stage to give my speech, I paused halfway through and said, 20 years ago, I lost everything I thought mattered. But what I didn't realize then was that sometimes life takes things away, not to punish you, but to prepare you." The crowd fell silent. I could feel every eye on me. Forgiveness doesn't make you weak. It gives you back control. And sometimes the greatest revenge isn't payback, it's peace. There was applause, but all I heard was the sound of my own heart. It wasn't angry anymore, it was still. Later that night, as I walked out into the cold, my ex-wife approached me. She didn't say a word. She just took my hand for a moment, a gesture that said everything words never could. Then she turned and walked away into the night. And that was it. No grand reconciliation, no fairy tale ending. Just closure. Real, raw, human closure. Years later, when I finally retired, her son took over the company. The first thing he did was rename it Eterna. He said it meant everlasting, a reminder that strength, kindness, and time heal all wounds. I didn't cry that day, but I did feel something close, that ache you get when life finally forgives you back. And sometimes, when I sit by the window at sunset, I whisper to myself, "You took everything, but in the end, I took it all back, not through anger, but through grace." So if you're watching this right now and you've been broken, betrayed, left behind, listen carefully. Don't rush your revenge. Build your peace, because one day they'll look up and you'll be so far ahead they won't even know how you did it. That's your closure. That's your comeback. And trust me, it's worth every silent night you spent rebuilding yourself. Funny thing about time, it doesn't heal everything. It just teaches you how to live with the scars. I learned that in silence, over decades of rebuilding what someone once tore apart. Now, at 70, I live in a quiet house by the sea, the kind of silence that hums like memory, gentle, steady, forgiving. Every morning I sit with a cup of coffee and watch the tide come in, and I think about how the waves always return. No matter how far they drift, that's what life does too. It comes back around, always. I've got pictures on the shelf, some faces still familiar, some lost to time. But I don't hold grudges anymore. What's the point? Grudges are like rust. They eat away at you long after the fight is over. Sometimes I catch myself smiling when I think of the man I used to be, angry, bitter, ready to burn everything just to prove I wasn't weak. I thought revenge was the only closure. I thought success would erase the pain. But now I know better. Revenge doesn't erase anything. It just delays the healing. Peace, that's the real victory. Last year, my ex-wife passed away quietly in her sleep. Her son called me first. His voice trembled, like he didn't know whether to cry or apologize. I told him not to say a word. I already knew what he was feeling. We held a small funeral by the old church. Only a few people came. After everyone left, I stayed behind, standing by her grave as the wind moved through the trees. And I said, "We did it." We survived each other. That might sound strange to you, but survival, real survival, isn't just about living. It's about learning how to live after loss, after betrayal, after love fades and the world stops clapping. And when I drove home that night, I didn't feel sorrow. I felt release. Like a story that finally wrote its own ending. Now, sometimes when the sunset hits the water just right, I can almost hear her laugh. Faint, familiar, somewhere in the wind. I don't turn around. I just listen, because some ghosts aren't meant to be chased away. Some are just meant to remind you that you live deeply, and maybe that's what all of this was about. Not revenge. Not redemption, but remembering that even pain is proof that we cared. You know, people still ask me, if you could go back, would you do it all again? And I always say, every single part of it, because every betrayal taught me how to rebuild. Every loss taught me how to hold on. Every ending gave me a better beginning. So if you're watching this and you've lost everything, your marriage, your money, your peace, don't rush to prove them wrong. Prove yourself right. Go quiet, work hard, heal slow. And one day, without even trying, you'll look around and realize you didn't just take it all back. You took yourself back. And trust me, that's the kind of comeback they'll never recover from. Because the real revenge? It's peace. And that's the one thing they'll never know how to steal from you.